I'm pleased today to introduce a prominent scientist who is going to talk about water. Dr. Theib Oweis is a senior consultant and former director, Water, Land and Ecosystem Program in the International Center for Agricultural Research in Dry Areas, ICARDA. Formerly a distinguished guest professor of water management in agriculture at the International Platform for Dryland Research and Education of Tottori University in Japan. Since 1991, he worked for ICARDA as a director, scientist, and research manager. Other assignments include the University of Jordan as assistant professor in irrigation and drainage engineering, and Dar Alhandasah Consultant as a field irrigation engineer, founded and managed Dar Ar Rai Irrigation and Water Consultants, a turnkey firm in modern irrigation, received a BSc degree in agriculture from Aleppo University, Syria in 1972, and Masters in Science and PhD in 1980 and 1983 in Agriculture and Irrigation Engineering from Utah State University, Logan, Utah. Has over 40 years of experience and leadership in international research and development and in human capacity building and the management of water for agriculture. Visited and conducted work in over 80 countries, including implementation of projects in developing countries, training of nationals, and mobilizing funds. Author of over 300 refereed journal publications, books, or book chapters, and reference proceeding and conference proceedings in the area of water use efficiency, supplemental irrigation, water harvesting, water productivity, deficit irrigation, salinity, adaptation to climate change, and the management of scarce water resources, especially in dry environment. Reviewer and member of editorial boards of several refereed journals. From here, Dr. Oweis, please, the board is yours.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored and pleased to address this very important participants in this webinar, and hope that we will have a useful and productive discussion after our talk. I would like first to thank the Islamic Academy and Renina for inviting me and for organizing this very important and timely. Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Rida are good friends, and this is a very successful series of webinars which will be very for everybody. This morning, I will turn on my slides, my presentation, and you will not see me until the end of the presentation. So hope that you will follow me as I go probably a little bit fast. Please.
Hello.
Yes, do you hear me? Everything is set. Dr. Abdullah, is everything okay?
Yeah.
Can I go ahead? Well, our talk today is regarding the debate on what strategies we should adopt to cope with water scarcity in agriculture, and not only water scarcity, but also climate change. And As you all know, we have been for centuries working on addressing agricultural water management while water is ample and there is no big problems associated with water supply for agriculture. In the last 20, 30 years, we start feeling the deficiency of water for agriculture and the issues associated with decreasing agricultural water management. So do we still use conventional strategies for coping with water scarcity, or we should search for new thinking, new approaches to be able to cope with this multiple stresses of water and climate change and other things. The issue here is that we all want to produce more food with less water. This is one of the pillars of food security in the region, in the regions with scarce water resources. So how do we use this amount of water available, or even less in many places, to produce more food so we can achieve food security and independence in terms of food for the poor especially. We'll go through this strategies and see what do we need to change to do that. Let's first see about water scarcity. Water scarcity is increasing in the region, especially in the dry areas. And you could see here the water scarcity from 1990 to 250, how it's dropping. The highest was in 1990 with the blue bars, and the least is in the yellow, it's expected to be in 250. And you see the chronic stress and the absolute stress. And we could see that most of the countries, or at least the countries in this region, dry regions, are going to be below the absolute stress, which is 500 cubic meters per capita per year, with exceptions here and there, but in general, that is the status of the countries. Not only that, but agriculture in particular is going to be hit hard. Still, agriculture uses most of the water in the region, or even globally. But this amount of water is also decreasing because of diversion of water to other uses, to domestic use, to environment, to industry, to other more priority and more return aspects. And you could see here, for example, we are talking from Jordan, and Jordan was about 75% of water resources diverted to agriculture. Now it's around 50% diverted to agriculture. The same thing is happening with Lebanon, same thing with Bahrain, even Saudi Arabia, and many other countries in the areas with dry environments are decreasing amount of water for agriculture. Not only that, but also climate change is hitting hard, especially the drier environments. It adds to the problem as less rainfall going to be in general, and more demand because of increased evapotranspiration and increased, especially evaporation, is predicted in these countries. And the consequences of all that coming would be multiple. It will be economic, social, and environmental. And it cannot be taken easily. It's very serious. I took this from a newspaper in Islamabad some years ago, and it says that there is hunger strike against irrigation officials because they reduced the amount of water to the farmers. So imagine hunger strike is used in politics. So imagine how social disturbance can happen if water scarcity for agriculture can impact the poor and the people that are working in agriculture. New water is very limiting. There is not new water. People talk about bringing new water here and there. It's very limited. Surface water is mostly tapped. You could see very little water that is not tapped yet. There is over-exploitation of groundwater. This figure, you see it in Morocco, you see it in Syria, you see it in Jordan, you see it everywhere now. Groundwater is being tapped, over-exploited. Even politicians, governments are unable to control the depletion of groundwater. Marginal quality water, there are some small amounts like treated sewage water, like brackish water, but this problem of quality is big issues. The amount is small, it impacts environment and it impacts health, and it's anyway cannot solve the big problem of water resources for agriculture. There is desalination, and you could see some desalination is growing a lot on the coastal lines, but it grows a lot in coastal lines of rich countries only. It's not very widely spread in less than rich countries. And the amount produced are mainly for drinking and for industrial and tourism. It's costly for agriculture. Still, we are around $1 per cubic meter, probably a bit less somewhere, but it's have a problem of cost. It's environmentally issues. A lot of bran is being dumped in the coastal areas and already creating problems. The transport of water desalinated from coastal areas to inland is another added problem. There are people talking about water transfer from basin to basin or from country to country. A lot of that were discussed and talked about between countries, and there were a lot of great ideas. None of it is working. The cost of it is a problem, and there is a lot of politics. People say, well, where is the key for the water? If the valve is not in my country, I cannot rely on it, and I cannot depend on other countries controlling my water. So we have issues, we have problems. Water is getting less. There is no new water that is substantial, and agriculture is suffering, and we need to increase food production for food security. What people do, what we do as scientists, we have been doing for centuries to overcome water shortages and water scarcity. The current strategies, I claim that it is insufficient, and I will show that now in these slides. The first big strategy, which everyone works with, every country, every scientist, is increasing yield. We increase agricultural water yield, agricultural crop yield, which is land productivity. How many tons per hectare? We want an objective to increase the tons per hectare for crops. And you could see in this slide that the relationship between water consumed, evapotranspiration, and yield is almost straight line. It's a little bit sometimes curvature, but this is a common curve for water consumed versus crop yield. So if you want to move from yield 1 to yield 2, you need to change from ET1 to ET2, which means that to increase yield, you need more water. This water in many countries is not available, and it is not a practice and a strategy to increase the demand for water. Every country with scarce water resources is reducing the demand, not increasing the demand. Increasing yield requires more water, and that is okay in countries with an ample amount of water. But it is not okay in countries like Jordan, where water scarcity is increasing, agricultural water is reducing, so we need to think of a different strategy. Increasing yield is not a solution in water scarce areas, just because it needs more water and that this new water is not available. The second strategy is controlling demand. And you see that in every country and every irrigation and water ministry and every agriculture, we need to demand management, controlling water demand. And controlling water demand has a lot of broad aspects, but in general, it is centered over water pricing. And you see donors, the World Bank, everybody tell you, price water, because pricing water means more efficient use of water, means demand is less, because when farmers have to pay for water, then he has to reduce the losses, then less, which is true. This is possible. When you price water, then you reduce the demand. But does it work? It's not working. It's not working because politically and socially, it's not feasible. I can remember a request from the World Bank to the Prime Minister of Egypt. He said that you have to price water. He said, you want my government to be toppled next day. Politically and socially, pricing water is not working. There are some countries pricing water, but the prices are so low that it is not covering even the maintenance. And in developed countries, it's working fine because they can afford that, and there are subsidies in different things. But in developing countries, which as our countries here are more, the water pricing and the demand management has very little success. And it is not going to be resolved soon. There are new approaches and things that can be worked on that, but not in the coming future. There will be a controlling of the demand associated with water pricing and this complicated thing. Also, it requires stronger institutions. You do need farmers or organizations, associations, very strong ones, to deal with water demand, to deal with water pricing, if you want to do it. But we don't have this. And in general, our institutions, water user associations and farmer, are weak. And this is a big issue everywhere in this region, and it's not being solved to deal with that. Another issue is improving irrigation efficiency. This is the strategy that goes everywhere, and the most of water agricultural people working on improving irrigation efficiency, which means reducing losses at the farm. If your efficiency is 70%, it's much better than efficiency of 50%. And to increase it from 50%, which means that you lose 50% of the water, to 70%, to lose only 30%, you need to invest in that. Let's look at what happens for water losses on the farm. You have irrigation and precipitation. These are the two sources of water for irrigation and precipitation. Where water goes, where water is lost, you store water in the root zone of the crop, which is the productive one, but also there is some seepage from the canals. There is some runoff that comes out of the field. Probably in drip irrigation, you don't have this. You have some drainage water that goes to remove salts from the root zone. And there is deep percolation. If you're using surface irrigation or sprinkler irrigation or even drip irrigation, there is deep percolation that can happen. So these are the three losses: seepage, deep percolation, and runoff and drainage. This is the ones that makes the irrigation efficiency less. Now, the idea of improving irrigation efficiency is to reduce this. But where do these losses go? If you look at the losses, evaporation from water from surface of the farm, which is difficult to control. And of course, there is transpiration, which is what we want to produce the crops. But these losses that goes down, look at it. The seepage continue going down and it joins usually groundwater or springs. The deep percolation also goes down continuously and feeds into groundwater. And this groundwater is recoverable, probably not on the same farm, but probably downstream or in the basin. The runoff is also recoverable. Downstream users use it. It can be captured from the streams after that. So it is also recoverable. It's not absolute loss. Drainage water even is partially recoverable. If you are in Egypt, you see that drainage water in the upper south has very good quality, and the farmers keep recycling it into the farms to compensate for irrigation water. And I know in Egypt there are 6-7 times water is recycled until it becomes very salty near so drainage water is also partially recoverable. So most of the losses associated with the low efficiency on the farm is recoverable at scale. They are not absolute loss to the country and absolute loss to the farms. It's absolute loss for the farmer, which he has to probably pump more water. So it's a little bit of cost, and it probably make some problems for the irrigation officials to provide the water. But in terms of water scarcity, in terms of lost water, it is not an absolute loss in general. The only loss here is evaporation, which is absolute, that you are unable to recover. So the irrigation efficiency reflects the performance of the irrigation system, not the performance of water and agriculture. Its losses are largely recycled at scale, doesn't say anything about productivity or return. If you have 100% irrigation efficiency, you can have zero yield, zero crop if you have disease or you have another problems. So it doesn't mean that your agriculture is good if you have high irrigation efficiency. There is a huge investment being driven by the industries to change the surface irrigation to modern irrigation in order to reduce these losses. So of course it's good, but to reduce the irrigation efficiency. But if you want to reduce that to save water at the country level or at the same level, this is not going to be the best way to do it. The third or fourth important strategy is modernizing irrigation systems. Modernizing irrigation systems is very common, and there is a lot of investment in modernizing irrigation systems, especially in water scarce areas. The objective is to save water and to improve the agricultural production. Now, if you see this report from FAO, this is produced a year ago or a couple of years ago, studying the modernizing irrigation systems in many countries all over the world. And it came to two major conclusions. The first conclusion is that if you modernize irrigation, you're gonna increase the demand for water. Usually, if you modernize irrigation, then you have more crops, you have more evapotranspiration, you have more demand for water. And this is against the policies of all governments to reduce demand. So modernizing system does not reduce the demand of water. It generally increases it. And this is by evidence by FAO in a scientific studies conducted in many countries around the world. The second conclusion of that study says that it achieves little water saving. The only saving, for example, of drip irrigation is by reducing evaporation when you use mulches, for example. So it's probably 4 or 5% of the water used. It doesn't save lots of water in terms of absolute loss. It requires a lot of, not only that, but as you see in this picture, you can manage drip irrigation well, like this one, but also you can mismanage it. If you keep the water running, it will make deep percolation just like surface irrigation, and it will join the groundwater again. And we have studies here by Dr. Shatnawi in the Jordan Valley. He found that the efficiency of drip irrigation in the Jordan Valley was about 55%. It's just like surface irrigation. Why? Because farmers are mismanaging it. They allow water to keep going in the drip irrigation until it reaches the groundwater. So technology is important, but it's not everything. There are other strategies that you need to do to be able to save water. And modernizing irrigation is also good, but it's not going to guarantee this demand and saving of water, especially that farmers' capacity is important, and there is a lot of substantial investment associated with it. This is not to say that we are not for modernizing irrigation. We are for modernizing irrigation, but not for water saving and for reducing demand. It's for agricultural productivity, for better quality, and for other purposes that are legitimate and they are good. So with these strategies, major strategies, are not sufficient to solve the problem of water scarcity in agriculture. What should we do? Now, over the last couple of decades, there are new thinking coming in. There are, especially for water scarce areas. The first concept that is now emerging and growing to be able to solve the problems is by applying the concept of water productivity. The water productivity is the return per unit of water consumed, what you get out of each cubic meter of water. And this is being used earlier like water use efficiency term, but it's not. Water use efficiency doesn't cover the concept of water productivity. The return here includes biomass like water use efficiency, like grain, meat, milk, etc. It includes income. It converts the thing through the market to money. How many dollars or dinars or rupees per cubic meter of water you are consuming. It returns environmental benefits, carbon sequestration. How much sequestration you do with cubic meter of water consumed. Social benefits, what employment you get per cubic meter of water consumed. People in the countryside, they're doing subsistence farming sometimes, but all the families are working in agriculture, and each cubic meter of water is responsible for employment. Energy per cubic meter of water, how many calories you get per cubic meter of water. Nutrition is one of the elements of food security. How much protein, how much carbohydrate, how much fats you get per cubic meter of water. The concept of water productivity put all of these in the same framework. The water, of course, we look at the water in terms of quality, in terms of location, because location has a cost, in terms of availability. You may get the water when you don't need it. So that's affect the return for water and the water productivity. But most important in this concept, which is different from the convention, is the word consumed. And here we are talking about water that is depleted, not the water that's applied. Water applied, probably half of it will be recycled. But consumed water includes evaporation and transpiration, and the part of water that's quality deterioration, like the part of the drainage that's too salty to be used again. So these are only considered in the denominator. The water that is depleted and is not recoverable again. This is the concept and the framework where the center of water, putting water in the center, is important. Will you give you some types of water productivity and some values? Look at this. This is biological water productivity, biophysical water productivity. How many kilograms per cubic meter of water you get for each crop? For example, you grow beef, you get like 30 to 100 grams of meat per cubic meter of water. You grow potatoes, you get from 3 to 7 kilograms per cubic meter of water. Wheat, 0.2 to 1.2 kilograms of wheat, and so on. These are different crops producing different kilograms per cubic meter. This doesn't mean that one of them is better than the others. Why? It's not because of the economic water productivity. This is how many dollars these crops or these kilograms per cubic meters bring for you. The beef bringing $0.1 to $0.3 per cubic meter of water, not kilogram of meat per cubic meter of water. The olives, for example, is very good productive thing, from $1 to $3 per cubic meters. Dates, palm, dates from 0.8 to 1.6, and so on. So the returns of these crops is a measure for the farmer. If he can grow, of course, there are other factors to grow them, but you can differentiate between the returns from the returns per dollar per cubic meter. Not only that, food security requires nutrition. You need to worry about how much protein per cubic meter. And I was talking to Dr. Abdullah before the meeting that in Egypt, for example, faba bean full is a main source of protein. So how many kilogram of faba bean per cubic meter of water Egyptians produce? And this is how much grams per cubic meters of protein they produce from, imagine, from beef, the least, from meat, more from lentils, wheat, potatoes, etc. And it's amazing, it's ironic to say that you get more protein from wheat per cubic meter of water than from meat. And we always say that beef especially, beef, is very water inefficient, and it is a source of problems to the climate, methane and others. So the climate change convention, they discourage people of producing more beef, because there's about 20% of climate change is associated with beef production or animal production. So beef meat is not good for water, and it's not good for health, and it's not good for environment. So we encourage more getting protein from other crops. Now, not only that, but also calories per cubic meter of water. How many calories you get? And you could see here the same crops for the same cubic meter of water, how many calories you can get per cubic meter of water. And calories is very important because it gives you the energy. And there are lots of things in the energy associated with calories in calories, as each calorie you need in your body needs a liter of water to produce. If you are consuming 3,000 calories, average daily consumption in countries, not poor countries, not in the middle, about 3,000 calories per day is needed for a person every day. That requires 3,000 liters of water every day, like 3 cubic meters, to produce the food that you consume. So imagine that you drink 1 or 2 liters a day, but you consume 3,000 liters a day for your food. Now, annually, if you multiply this by a year, this is about 1,000 cubic meters per capita. You use 1,000 cubic meters every year for your food consumption. And that is the number that you see it in the graphs and publications as a threshold for water scarcity. So if a country has less than 1,000 cubic meters per capita per person, that means the countries start going into water scarcity, and will go down to 500, then it's absolute water scarcity. Here the numbers come from, which is the number of calories that you require to produce from your food. So this water productivity concept and framework has different drivers and meanings at different scales. So if you are talking about the basin scale, the drivers for improving water productivity are competition among users like environment, agriculture, domestic, conflict between countries, and equity issues. These are the issues that would drive water productivity at basin level. But if you come to the country level, it's different. The country level, the drivers for improving water productivity is food security. Country want to secure food for its people. Hard currency. Some countries, like Syria, produce cotton to sell outside and get hard currency. So that drives the water productivity there. Sociopolitics. There is a lot of sociopolitics in the countries that favors crop on other area, on other, which is associated with productivity. At the farm level, if you go to the farmer, and those are a group of farmers in Egypt, their concern is maximizing economic return. How much money they can put in their pockets at the end of the year. This is the major concern. So kilograms per, the dollar or Egyptian pound per cubic meter of water. Then nutrition and subsistence farming. In some places, farmers are farming for subsistence, so nutrition there is very important. If they produce faba bean, they can get protein. If they produce other things, they get some other things. So these are the concerns when it comes to the farm. But if you go to the field level, where breeders are concerned, are working on the field level, on the crop one crop, their drivers for water productivity is maximizing biological output. They want to maximize how many kilograms per cubic meter of water they produce. Although this kilogram per cubic meter may not bring the farmer at the other level that the maximum dollar per cubic meter. So at all these levels, different drivers come in, and we need to evaluate them all together at different levels. So if you improve water productivity, then you make real water savings, not water savings like you improve the irrigation efficiency, because those are recycled. Here it's real water savings, and I show you a study that is recently concluded using remote sensing and ground truths in the Euphrates-Tigris basin. And this is the Euphrates-Tigris basin between Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And we looked at the rain-fed system and the irrigated systems on what is the existing water productivity and what would happen if you increase water productivity of the Euphrates-Tigris thing. And you could see here, the red shows the low water productivity. The green shows areas with higher water productivity. This is the results of the evaluation. We looked at increasing water productivity. By the way, the water productivity in general is less than 0.5 kilogram grains per cubic meter of water. So if we want to increase from 0.5 to 0.75 kilograms, or to 1 kilogram, or to 1.25 kilograms, which is, of course, increasing it require some measures, some investment, some changes in the thing. So if we do this, look at what happens in water saving. If you reduce, this is rain-fed. If you improve technologies, improve rain-fed, you save this amount of water from here to here, and this is in billions of cubic meters across the basin. So you are talking about 10 billions, 12 billions cubic meters, 15 billion cubic meters. If you go irrigated, you save down from 20 billion to about 10 billion only if you increase it to 1 kilogram per cubic meter with the same amount of food produced. Of course, here the amount of food produced is the same. All you change is the amount of water used, and that is the issue in increasing water productivity. So look at even the total savings. You could see here, if you can increase water productivity to 1.25 kilogram per cubic meter with the same food production, you can save about 20 billion cubic meters of water, which is more than the disputed amount of water between the countries. The countries are talking about much less than this amount of water. So there is another way of solving the problems, Taos boundary problems, is by improving water productivity and consuming less water everywhere in the region. Now, this is the center thing, is that conventionally we are producing to maximize yield. This is the curve, shows wheat land productivity, which is yield, versus water productivity. This is wheat in the Mediterranean region, all the Mediterranean region. There are similar curves for different crops and for generally like this. When you maximize yield, you use lots of water. But you can, if you don't have water, you can operate here. Here you maximize water productivity, not yield. So you actually lose in yield. You sacrifice some yield from the crop. But the amount of water you saved here is substantial. And if you put this amount of water in a new land, then you can produce much more crop for total. So this is, in scientists call it deficit irrigation. And deficit irrigation is one solution by moving from maximizing yield to maximizing water productivity. And this is the point. Here, we don't say that don't maximize yield. You do maximize yield in areas where water is not limiting, where land is more limiting, you maximize land productivity. When water is more limiting, you better shift from land productivity to water productivity, and that would bring more crop and bring more return and bring more satisfaction and relaxation to the water resources that we are having. Climate change, of course, is a big issue here. Conventionally, we deal with climate change like drought, increased drought, frequent drought, but climate change is not only drought, it's temperature, it's CO2, it's diseases, it's everything. And we look at downscaling climate parameters at local level. We need to bring these regional models, regional forecasts to the local level. And many of the developing countries, they don't have yet institutions and to bring that to the local level to see what's going to happen at the local level. Not only downscaling it, also you make simulation of the impact of changed parameters or production systems. What will happen when temperature increases on the evapotranspiration, on the diseases, on the insects, on the water resources, on every aspect. This is very important, and this is too complicated, but still we need lots of simulation impact to the changed parameters that we are seeing in this. And the final thing that we need to do is to evaluate the responses, like climate smart agriculture, coping potential and scaling. There is now the concept of climate smart agriculture, and climate smart agriculture has 3 pillars: productivity, adaptability, and mitigation. In many countries, developing countries, there's not much gases increased because it's not industrial, but there is a lot of productivity and adaptation potential that we need to look at to be able to cope with water scarcity. In conclusion, we need a paradigm change. We need to change our conventional thinking and approaches to put water in the center of the attention. We have been putting everything else in the center of the attention until recently, when we start being hit with water scarcity, and we found agriculture is suffering from the reduction of the amount of water. So we need to put it in the center of the attention for development in all water scarce regions. Changing from conventional strategies to a new thinking and a new, more progressive ways to handle this issue. And here are some things that you need to do. First, in the cropping patterns, you need to change cropping patterns. If you have less water, you cannot continue producing water thirst crops. You have to change to more water productive, not only kilograms, but also money and environment and social and everything. You need to select the crops that brings maximum return from each cubic meter of water. So countries who look for self-sufficiency, it's not feasible. You cannot produce everything in your country. In Jordan, we import 90% of our wheat. We cannot produce all the wheat that we need in Jordan. And if we try to do that, it will be infeasible. That will be very costly, and it will not work. So we need to look into another venues. Produce crops that you have comparative advantage in producing, and exchange virtual water. Why shouldn't I import wheat from Syria rather than producing it in my country? If Syria is producing it at very low cost, why should I produce it at very high cost? Regional cooperation, agreements, all these things are very important to maximize water productivity. Every country produce its comparative advantage and exchange for the crops and the food that is not. I know there are a lot of concerns. Many people say, well, I cannot rely on others for my food. And there are some examples. If you remember, in 2008, wheat was not available in the market. Whatever money you have, you cannot buy wheat. So there was countries who start producing, want to produce wheat in very water scarce areas. but then they changed their mind after they discovered that it is not feasible. So we need to find ways to maximize the return for the water that we are having, and exchanging for virtual water is important. And you could see here how much food imports we have this in these countries. And the blue one is food imports, and the red one is food exports. So we export little food in many countries. We import lots of food. And this is the virtual water export, which is the blue is virtual water imports, this one. And the yellow one line is the virtual water exports, which is very little. So we could see this, and we should use this concept to improve the relationships, improve the regional cooperation, improve the water productivity that everybody is using. Focus on land, from land, should shift from land to water, where water is more limiting. If water is controlling everything, then we should start measuring things with how many kilograms per cubic meter, not how many kilograms per hectare or tons per hectare. Because water is more limiting than land, then you can have as much land as you want, but you don't have as much water as you want. Irrigation performance indicators can be shifted from system efficiency, which is now we're focusing on irrigation system efficiency, to water productivity. The return for the water, not the efficiency. Efficiency is good, and we should continue improving the efficiency, but we should not put it in the center before water productivity, because water productivity compensates for all the little losses that are associated with system efficiency. And broaden the scale from local to regional to global. We are talking all the time about one crop and about one farm. That is not enough. We should start broadening that. The linkages are more important than a point data. So broaden the scale and work at different scales, then you will be able to manage things much better. And finally, national policies. This is all require policies to change the thinking, to change the subsidies, to change the rules, the regulations, the water allocation. This needs to be changed from being reactive. They react to crisis. If we have crisis, then we do policies. If we don't have a crisis, then it's okay. You need to be more proactive to avoid the looming crisis coming in water scarce areas for agriculture, especially for agriculture. And I would like to thank you very much for listening. Please send any email. This is my email. If you have any more information you need on these concepts and others, and I wish you all the best, and we'll be glad to have your questions to try to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oweis, for this enlightening seminar. As a matter of fact, I think it's going to excite a lot of questions regarding this new thinking of water productivity, importing and exporting virtual water. So I open the door for people to ask, and we have Dr. Azhar, please. Dr. Azhar, your microphone. Dr. Azhar, your microphone is not on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. I just want to start to talk about the water. There are 4 points to discuss about water. First thing is that we have rain as water. But because of the climate change, the distribution of rain on the earth is changing geographically. So how to cope with that? The way, because the rain is being distributed differently because of the climate, because the winds are changing. For example, the jet stream is getting weaker, which is having a very strong effect on the weather. Jet stream is weakening, and it has a very strong effect on the weather, and which also on the winds also are changing. And so what I'm saying is, if you want to have more water, it's better to have some artificial rain. Artificial rain. I know that in Jordan and other places, they're trying to have this artificial rain through seeding methods and high voltage methods. Can somebody say anything about that? First point. The second point is, which is very important, very, very important, is that the sources of water, fresh water, drinking water, are the glaciers in the mountains. For example, in the Himalayas, glaciers are so important. They're the biggest reserve of fresh water after the Antarctic. The biggest source of fresh water in Antarctic, and they're feeding 3 billion people around the Himalayas, 3 billion persons. So with the change of the climate, these glaciers are melting very fast. It doesn't mean that, so it means that the glaciers which melt very slowly in summer and feed the water in the rivers are disappearing, and the rain and the snow which would be on the mountains, it would melt very fast, and that creates a lot of problems like the flooding and all that. To control that, you need more barrages to stock water. So this is the problem. And the third problem is.
Thank you, Dr. Asghar, for the two questions. The first question, which is regarding artificial rain. Yes, in Jordan, there was a program is continuing for rain seeding, cloud seeding. There are some results that came out of this program. I'm following up on that. The problem with this is that it's very complicated. And the results, if you get more rain after applying one dose of iodide or whatever, it's difficult to judge if that rain is normal or is it from the application. Because you don't have lots of replicates, you don't have lots of huge data to judge it. It's not yet, that requires lots of, and there are a lot of experiences, even in the West, in the United States, and I'm aware of that there are several lawsuits between states regarding floods associated with rain seeding, regarding droughts, regarding these kinds of things. So I don't see that there are yet a conclusive results. There is still research, and we encourage that kind of research. I think that it is a potential, but requires a huge investment and a lot of research to be able to do that. And the second question, this is a big issue, of course, you talk about glacial melting, and this is associated with global warming, which we think that it is a very serious issue. It's not being taken too serious yet. And we think that, that there are disasters associated with global warming, and glacial melting is one of them. It's not easy to store all the water that is being melting from the north, from the glacier. It's very costly, especially for countries like Bangladesh, like people from the Himalaya and others. So it is the more feasible approach is to mitigate climate change, to reduce gases, and to stop global warming, not probably in the coming 20, 30, 40 years, as Paris Convention has indicated. The plan is okay. The problem is that a lot of countries are not abiding by the conclusions of the Paris Agreement. Take the United States, for example. They just withdrew from the agreement, for example. Although in the United States, I know there is a lot of institutions, lots of companies, lots of states that are doing what is needed in the climate change. Thank you.
We have, Dr. Oweis, we have a question from Dr. Butt. He asked, as one of the current methods for saving water for irrigation is the laser leveling of large irrigation crop fields. Would you please like to comment on this aspect? Thank you.
I could not get the thing.
He said, as one of the current methods for saving water for irrigation is the laser leveling of large irrigation crop fields. Would you please like to comment on this aspect?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Laser leveling is good for improving irrigation, uniformity, and precision agriculture. When you have laser guiding, you improve the crop, you improve the water productivity, and you improve the irrigation efficiency and everything. So it's a win-win when you can do it. Of course, it's not applicable to all the lands. If you take the steep areas and the highlands, you cannot make laser leveling. But in large areas, schemes with flat land and deep soils, of course, laser leveling is very effective in increasing crop and increasing water productivity. So it's a win-win solution.
Yeah, I think Dr. Shamsuddin want to ask a question. I don't know whether he is around. Okay. Dr. Saleh, Raj Saleh, please go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for preparing this conference, and also thank you very much for this interesting presentation. Just two questions. You mentioned about the effects of climate change on water scarcity. How much climate change can affect water scarcity in developing countries? And in different countries, climate change may affect differently. This is the first question. And the second question is that should we actually take in different developing countries different policies for water scarcity? And do you have any idea about economic policies for adaptation to climate change? Thanks.
Okay. How climate change in developing countries varies from place to place on water scarcity. The impact of climate change in dry environments, the general models, the global models, the regional models, show that generally, and I'm stressing here generally because there are some exceptions, the precipitation is reducing. We have some models that expect 25% reduction in precipitation in water resources, which means water resources. In some areas, less than 25% by the end of the century. Now, that's why I actually indicated that each country should have a scaling down of climate change forecasts to its local areas, not only to the country. Because if you take a country, there are different climatic zones, there are different conditions, there are, especially big countries like Iran, like Pakistan, like Egypt. So in every place, climate change will have different impact. So the countries should have strong institutions to downscale climate forecasts at major development areas, agricultural areas. Like here in the Jordan, we have major agricultural area in the Jordan Valley. So downscaling climate forecast to the Jordan Valley is very important. The same thing with other places. And then simulate the impact on others and the crops and other things based on the parameters that the downscaling would affect. The question on policies, it also varies from country to country. In general, as I indicated in my presentation, it's reactive to problems. Countries develop policies in reaction to a problem. If they have flood, then they start putting policies for flood. If they have drought, then they start putting something for drought. So, and when there's rain for few years, they forgot about the drought and they stop taking any action. This is unfortunately the case. We need to have proactive policies to address the issues on the long term. We know that water for agriculture is decreasing. So now there should be policies in the long term to cope with increasing water for agriculture. We need to increase food with less water. This should be the title of any policy in water scarce countries. Thank you.
Thank you
Dr.
very much.
Badran, Dr. Adnan,
Yes,
you want to ask?
yes, I want to talk about the choice of the crops. You have, I think it would be, it's very important to choose the right type of crop which use much less water. And the second thing is that you have to find the crop which can use even brackish salt, water with salt. You see, so these two things are very important. They go together. New types of crops, new types of good crops which use much less water, and the new type of crop which can use even saltish water. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, yes, you are right. There is only one note. Of course, we need to have crop that use less water. And there are crops that use lower quality water. Both are good strategies. The difference is that it's not that the crop uses less water only. It needs to use less water with more productivity. You need to ensure that the less water you use will bring you more money, will bring you more benefits of others. So it's the return for water that is more important that we need to focus on. You are right. Thank you.
And the second question, if I may ask, can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
You know, we normally in the countries, they use what they call the flood irrigation. You put the water in the field without any control. And you compare that with the drip technique, where you drip the water, you know. The question is, if I have 1 hectare of land and use the flood irrigation method, and then I use the drip method, what's the gain in terms of economy of water? Can he answer that question?
Yeah. Well, actually, this is the essence of the whole talk. I mean, we encourage using modern systems. We encourage having drip irrigation, but drip irrigation is not available everywhere. Farmers cannot afford it everywhere, and it's not the only solution everywhere. Now, if you can convert your system into drip irrigation, then it's good and fine. Of course, drip irrigation cannot be used on field crops, or it's at least not feasible economically to put it on wheat and maize and all these kinds of things because it's very costly. So this is crops, cereals and legumes and others are the center of food security in the world, and drip irrigation doesn't work for them. Of course, drip irrigation, if you have trees or you have vegetables, cash crops, it's much better, it's good. So you can convert it. But to convert from surface irrigation to drip irrigation, you need to look at the pluses and the minuses, benefit and cost. Benefit and cost in terms of money, but also benefit and cost in terms of capacity, in terms of maintenance, in terms of all the other aspects associated with that.
Dr. Rida,
Can I ask another question?
yeah, can we take from Dr. Rida? We'll come back to you, Dr. Rida.
I think Dr. Adnan has a question before me, please.
Yeah,
Dr.
I tried to get into him.
Dr. Adnan, okay, please.
Well, my question really, you see the problem in the MENA region, the Arab region, that the Arab region is located in arid and semi-arid zone of the world. So climate change becomes so serious and scary because any rise of temperature and any loss of rain, it will change it immediately to a desert. In other words, it is on the edge. So half of the biodiversity will be destroyed because of the climate change. So we are in our region more sensitive to climate change than Asian and European and American regions. Yes, they are subject to tsunamis. They are subject to erratic rainfall. But in the Arab region, it is a matter of survival. This is one question, and this is the challenge, really. The second challenge is most of our water in the Arab region is transboundary water. And 70% of our water resources, including the aquifers, including the underground water and surface water, 70% of it come from outside the Arab region. Take the Nile, for example. Now you have a crisis between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt about the distribution of the Nile. Take Euphrates and Tigris. Again, those two rivers, they come from Turkey, mostly. Again, there is a political problem. Take the Israeli, Arab-Israeli war on water, Yarmouk River and Tigris and Jordan River. Again, there is a conflict there. I think future wars in our area in Middle East will be born by scarcity of water because our water comes from outside our borders. And anything made outside our borders, like building dams or diversion of those rivers to other areas, will create wars in Middle East. The third thing, it's, I want to take Jordan, for example, here. The amount of rain comes on Jordan is about 8 million cubic meter per year, 8 billion cubic meter per year. Jordan utilizes only less than 2 billion cubic meter per year for irrigation, for industry, for water, and for other usage. So we end up in using only 20% of the rainfall on Jordan. 80% is gone by evaporation. The challenge here, how we tap those water resources, how we tap 80% of rainfall, which is lost on Jordan, how we tap it through dams, through conservation of the rainfall, building dams, building dams to feed the aquifers, and so forth. So I think there is a lot for technology and science to do in providing more resources of water by conservation. And I think the problem of water, this is to Dr. Oweis, the problem of water in most of the world is management problem, is really management problem and distribution problem, and the use of technology of conservation of water. I think that probably, I said the last time, we have to redefine food security. Food security probably is not to produce everything we eat, because cereal consume a lot of water, and we don't have the technology to irrigate with a lot of water resources the cereals. So if we produce fruits and vegetables and we export it, and with the hard currency we make from those, we buy the cereal from outside, I think this is considered a food security. When you talk about food, you export food and you import food. but the balance of food trade should be equal, not to make a deficiency in your trade balance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bedran. I cannot agree more with your intervention, with your thing. I think climate change is disastrous to the dry areas. I agree with you 100%, and the consequences are going to be really bad and cost lots of money for natural resources, for people, for food. And the problem is that we in the water scarce areas, in the dry areas, we have not contributed to the global warming, and we have no control over that now. So we are actually under the mercy of the world in terms of global warming, climate change. The only thing we can do is that we try to cope with it, adaptation. This is actually the game that we are going to play in the future. We need to adapt to less rain, to more temperature and CO2, to all the consequences associated with that. And as I'm preaching in increasing water productivity, I think water productivity is one venue to use this less water in a better way and try to make more food with this less water. I showed the Euphrates-Tigris study on water productivity, and probably solving the conflict will take years and years. Probably looking at improving agriculture and use of water in terms of increasing water productivity, it's much easier and much more feasible to resolve the conflict than politics. We found that by only increasing water productivity from 0.5 to 1.2, you save 20 billion cubic meters of water annually. And this is much more than the cubic meters that are under dispute between the countries and all that kinds of thing. So there are solutions that we can do, and these are some of these to contribute to these solutions. And yeah, in Jordan, evaporation is your numbers are on the optimistic and positive side, Dr. Bedran. I know that 90% of the rainfall in Jordan is gone lost, mainly in evapotranspiration, but most of it, of course, is evaporation. And it's very difficult to capture that. We don't work to capture the 80%. If we can capture 10% or 20%, we solve the problems for the coming 50, 100 years. And capturing this can come through not only water harvesting, which is one venue to do that, but also through changing the cropping patterns, improve rain-fed agriculture, and address the evaporation issues in a more technological and more advanced way. Thank you.
Dr. Shibli, Dr. Rida.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Theib, actually, for this great information and the data you presented. Actually, I know you were a key expert in preparing the climate smart agriculture strategy for Jordan. And that's really an excellent thing to do for the country, especially we are one of the poorest countries in the world in the water issue. But focusing on the smart agriculture, focusing on the new innovations in agriculture, focusing on aquaponics and hydroponics in vertical agriculture, how would you see really the future of smart agriculture in developing countries and in Jordan per se? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rida. That's a very relevant question. Actually, currently we are working on a work plan funded by the World Bank to develop major climate smart agricultural packages and study its feasibility and its contribution to greenhouse gases and others. And with us, of course, our sister center, Syria and Biodiversity Alliance. And we are working, of course, with the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Irrigation and many other partners. But still the study is going on and probably it requires another 3-4 months to be concluded. Climate smart agriculture does not mean mitigating only, mitigating climate change thing. Climate smart agriculture means that you need to have agriculture that is productive first, productive, and then you need to have agriculture that is resilient and need to have it mitigating. And in Jordan, these packages that we are working on packages associated with date palm, with vegetables, with olive, with rangeland, and with small ruminants. There are potential to develop these packages and these in a climate smart agriculture fashion. For example, you are using lots of energy in an industry. Try to convert the energy to be more green energy than the currently used. They are using fertilizers. You are using lot of practices in these things. And being climate smart means you convert these things to be productive, to be resilient, and to be also to mitigate climate. I frankly don't think Jordan is contributing to global warming, very little, even negligible. So trying to mitigate is good, but it's not the big issue. We can mitigate if we do things on large scale. For example, restoring the badia, restoring rangelands. If you bring the badia to what it was before 70, 80 years ago, there is a lot of carbon sequestration in the badia because it's 70, 80% of Jordan. So if you have all the rangelands are in good shape, there is a lot of carbon sequestration. There is a lot of climate mitigation with that. But in general, we are focusing on preventing greenhouse gases, but more on productivity and productivity, as I indicated, it's like in water scarce areas, the return for the water, thinking of the water as central for all these kinds of things. Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Al-Azrouni. Dr. Muhammad Al-Azrouni.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Thank you, Dr. Theib. I think I just want to add a new point for the strategies, and you just mentioned it, but it is not very clear, which is, I think, one of the strategies for increasing water productivity and producing more efficient climate smart agriculture is the cropping system, which including the developing a new varieties that can adopt for these two objectives. And I think the thing that Dr. Adnan just mentioned, which is plant genetic resources, I know that we are climate change affecting our plant genetic resources, but in the same time, it is changing our plant genetic resources in order to cope with the new climate change, which is a potential that we can utilize, because when the climate change, our plants are changed also in order to sustain. So we have to think of very sustainable breeding programs and genetic resource utilization programs that can be within part of the packages that you are talking about, Dr. Theib, because we cannot wait until we bring plants from outside in order to be including in these packages. So we have to think of sustainable programs that can cope with these things in all the region. It's not only Jordan, it is the whole region need that. And it can be, you know, in cooperative way where we can build, team of our nets of cooperation in order to achieve that. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Ajroun. It's great to see you again and coming with the good ideas. I agree with you very much on that.
Dr. Mahmoud Dweri.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Theib, for the nice ideas. You know, I am also concerned about the climate change. We have not really utilizing fully our water resources. And when I speak about our water resources, I speak about rain-fed agriculture. I think in Jordan, in the Arab countries, you know, with they are the Islamic countries, and the lands are becoming small holdings. You know, these lands have been ignored. And so the farmers are not planting their land. The governments, unfortunately, you know, with so many new ideas, you know, they say that, okay, rain-fed is not contributing, it does not generate income, etc. They're at the farm level. But if we really take them at the national level, they really can produce a lot. And if you want to use or utilize the water which comes from the heavens, from the skies, I think, you know, we really need to design programs where we give more importance to rain-fed agriculture. I think in the past, you know, maybe you have been working with ICARDA, a consultant in many different countries. You have seen that we can increase the yield 2 or 3 times, but the inputs are not there. And we can demonstrate to the government that we can increase the yields, we can increase the production, but the governments are not supporting a few programs to increase the production, and they are not really taking care of the small farmers in the rain-fed agriculture. I think this is an important aspect of the responding to the climate change, that we want to see that every drop of rain and every drop of water is being used. It is like using the high technology in the irrigated crops. Rain-fed agriculture is also important for food security, and I think it can save many lives of the farmers. And you know, I think this is one way, also one mechanism which we can respond to in the climate change, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dweri. I can't emphasize more rain-fed agriculture for one reason. The reason is what Dr. Badran indicated, which is the 80–90% loss of rainfall. We lose 80 or 90% of rainfall in evaporation. If you don't utilize the rainfall, which we call it green water, which is used in rain-fed areas. If we don't use the water by plant, then it evaporates back. So if you have rainfed systems that are good, then you capture the lost rain, which is the major objective in Jordan. Now I'll give you something, but the problem is that policies and government interventions are not always at the same level of what we expect and what we hope. Take the Badia. The Badia is 70–80% of Jordan. Imagine they get 150–200 millimeters of rain. They get 200 millimeters of rain, or say 150 millimeters of rain. 90% of this 150 millimeters of rain is billions of cubic meters. You multiply it by the area. If this water is captured by rangeland, then it's not lost. Then you actually utilize it. This is green water. Now, what is the focus on? The focus is on making dams. But the dams are for runoff water, not for the water that evaporates from the surface of the soil. So dams can capture probably 100 million in the Badia, or 200 million cubic meters. But there are billions that evaporates from soil surface. And the only way to capture it is by putting plants there. The plants cannot be put if you don't utilize microcatchment water harvesting, because the water doesn't infiltrate in the soil. So there is a restoration program led by the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture, which is not performing well. For the last 5 years or 6 years, only 4,000 hectares are implemented. And Dr. Dweri is on the committee, the advisory committee on that. There is no enough support for bringing back the rangelands. And we really urge government to change policy and look for a vision for the future, not only reacting to crises that come today or yesterday. You're right. I appreciate your point of view, Dr. Dweri.
Dr. Abbini, please.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to start from where Dr. Dweri and Dr. Ajloni ended their talk. And I learned so much from the lecture today. And I was just, impressed about the idea is that in Jordan, to have food security, I don't have to grow all my crops, all my national needs. So that is just leading me to a thinking, is there any strategies are currently implemented? And I'm so glad that the Islamic World Academy of Science is hosting this conference, because if, let's say, few countries could set an example where, for example, in Jordan, I focus on olive tree cultivation. In Syria, they focus on another type of cultivation, and then there will be a collective, let's say, sharing and exchange of goods that could help suffice the national needs. So is there any thoughts? I know it's a challenge, regional networking that could help develop strategies at not only a local level, but also at a regional scale, like let's say collaboration with Egypt, with certain neighboring countries that could help make the region self-sufficient in major needs of crops. I learned so much about the irrigation efficiency versus the water productivity. But my question is that regional collaboration, is there anything on the ground, or is there something to look forward in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very important issue. And there are some examples. Take what do they call it? The calendar, crop exchange calendar between Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, for example. At some times in the year, we export potatoes for them and import fruits from Lebanon and vegetables from Syria. In the winter, we send some vegetables to them and get some other. There are attempts. This is working. This is good when the political atmosphere is good. This is great. This is what we want. But in general, politics overcome logic and science. This is the problem. I'll give you an example. Sudan has water, has land, has people, and it can be the basket of food security for the Arab region, right? So what the Arab region did to Sudan, they didn't go and help Sudan to develop agriculture. They go there and do land grabbing. They took land and invest for themselves. This is what have been done there. Countries go to there, take piece of land and produce and sell outside for the market, international market. So it's a business. The cooperation between countries is the solution to water crisis. As especially Dr. Badran indicated the transboundary issues and that our water is controlled from outside. This complementarity in crops is not big deal, can be done, and countries should sit and agree on this together to be able to reduce a lot of the cost of water use for non-economic production of crop. Unfortunately, there is not much of that in the region. Things happen by nature, trade. People import things and export things. And the figure I showed in virtual water import and export is not designed and tried to improve by countries in the region. That's what the output. But we look forward to see that countries get together and try to improve this curve to be able to reduce the cost of water scarcity. Thank you.
Well, if there is no question, then I have one question for you, Dr. Oweis. When you talk about water productivity, you talk about return or polycubic meter of water. And when you talk about return, are you meaning that it is the yield or the price, the cash? Is it the yield per cubic meter or the cash per cubic meter?
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Well, actually, both the yield per cubic meter is the biophysical return, but the cash is the result of that when you put it in the market. You can produce a crop with very high return per cubic meter, like take tomatoes. In the Jordan Valley, you can produce tomatoes in greenhouses or hydroponic or aeroponic with very high return per cubic meter of water. But when you go out, there is no market for the tomato. For example, when there is problems in marketing, then the farmer throw the tomatoes or sell it with a very low price. So the return, economic return is not good. So what is the benefit of increasing the biophysical return if the economic return is not good? Actually, the framework for the water productivity is comprehensive. That's why the beauty of the concept is that you don't look at one side only, you look at all the thing comprehensively and try to evaluate. In some places, you need to emphasize more economic. Sometimes you need to emphasize nutrition. I gave an example of the protein output. Sometimes you need to emphasize social return. Yeah, I'll probably quote Dr. Dweri about rain-fed agriculture. When people work in the rain-fed areas and produce crops and they go and sell them in the market return is way below the social return that they get for employment, for subsistence, for food, for everything. So when we take the GDP of agriculture in Jordan, we take only the market, but we don't take the social, environmental, and the other aspects into consideration. And we don't convert that into money. I mean, this is a challenge for our economists, is to convert social benefits of cropping, rain-fed cropping or agriculture to money, to be able to show that agriculture is more important than it is now. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I have difficulty because you presented one graph talking about olive production is have more or higher value of water productivity compared to lentils, for instance. I could imagine that the cost of harvesting of olives is very high compared to lentils. And the lentils are usually also rain-fed, like the olives. So I cannot just grasp it.
Yeah. Well, I understand your point, Dr. Abdullah. Actually, the data I showed is not for Jordan.
Okay.
The data I showed is kind of global.
Oh, okay. Now I understand.
And there are lots of things that doesn't apply to Jordan. That's why I think countries should do these studies locally, because the local market is different and the productivity and other things are different. So this is needed to be done at local level for each crop and for each investment to compare them to see if they are which is better than the other.
Is there, okay, for Nael, maybe the last question.
Thank you, Dr. Oweis, for this talk. You came across the FAO report on modernizing irrigation systems, where they concluded that these systems create more water demand, achieve little water savings, and so on and so on. And in your conclusion, you stated that there should be a change in conventional strategies. Is there a conflicting statement here? And further on, I would like to ask, how can we harness the benefits of agricultural technologies, digital innovations for agri-food systems? As you may know, not only the FAO or ICARDA, most of our international organizations are focusing on agricultural technologies in developing countries. So how can we harness the benefits of these agricultural technologies for improving or increasing water productivity? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nael. Yes, the modernization of irrigation systems. By the way, it's not, modernization doesn't mean converting from surface to drip. You can modernize surface irrigation. You can modernize sprinkler irrigation. You can modernize any system. I give you an example of options. We are not saying that modernization is not good. I really worried because sometimes I'm being misunderstood on that. I'm saying that you should have the options in front of you, evaluated in a way with your objectives. Is your objective from drip irrigation is to save water? If that is the objective, then don't do it because it doesn't save too much water. This is the point. So you need to put the objective first. What do you want from that? Now in Egypt, for example, I don't know if we have any participants from Egypt here. In Egypt, we modernize surface irrigation. ICARDA worked with the national system. We did something called raised bed system, and we developed a machine to make a raised bed, uniform it on the field, and with seeds, seedlings, and others. And the machine and the technology that is developed on surface irrigation was much more successful than any other system. Now there is 1 million faddans adopting that technology. In Egypt, take another 200 years, you will not see adoption for drip irrigation like this in a few years. So you modernize, but you put an objective for the modernization and work on that. Think of what the objective is. If your objective is producing high quality vegetable with cash crops and with others, yes, put drip irrigation, not only drip irrigation, also put hydroponic and use aeroponic and use everything. But if you are worried only about saving water, these are not necessary. You can use another systems and still do the same for what you want. Of course, technology is important to harness agriculture thing. We work on technologies, but the concept of technology has to be taken together with the thinking, with the objectives, with the what you need. The people are copying things without thinking. If somebody tells you, well, I want to increase my productivity, take this, especially if you take the private sector. The private sector want to sell you things. If you don't know exactly what you want, then you will buy things that you don't need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any, Dr. Azhar, please go ahead.
This is a technical, Professor Asghar speaking from France. This is a technical point. You know, when you prepare the field to sow your crop, you plow it. It's claimed now very strongly that by plowing the field, the soil loses its humidity. Now it's very strongly recommended that you should not plow the field, but sow the field without plowing, and that keeps the humidity in the soil and increases the yield of the crops. What's your point?
Yeah, well, yeah, there are, you know, this we call conservation agriculture.
Yes.
Or zero tillage or minimum tillage. This is very concept that is available. It proved to be good. The conservation agriculture also reduces evaporation from soil surface, because if you plow the soil, then there is more evaporation. So you lose more. If you use conservation agriculture, you save water to be used by the crop. So it's a good system. It's applied in many countries. We have tested that system coming from Australia many years ago, and we recommend it. The problem of the details, always the issues is in the details. First of all, this thing to be done, you need a machine, big machine. These machines are expensive. A machine to cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. So farmers don't have it to do it. Second, in our countries, conservation agriculture requires that you leave the residue. When you crop wheat, for example, you harvest it, you leave the residue on the soil. It's not working in our countries. We tried it in many places. Farmers would like to graze it. Sheep come and eat it. So none of the residues stay in the field. This is another issue of it. Third issue is cultural. When you go to a farmer now in my village, tell him don't plow, he said, start laughing at you. Culture, conventionally, traditionally, people like to cultivate to control weed, for example. So conservation agriculture requires that you need some other ways to control the weed, like chemicals or whatever. Using chemicals is not very good for the environment. So there are complex factors where conservation agriculture is not spreading widely. It is good, it's working well in developed countries, in Mexico also, in Latin America, there's some in Australia. In Syria, we did manufacture machines to reduce the cost. Finally, we got a seeder about $6,000 to $7,000, and it worked. But then, because of the conflict there, the whole project collapsed, I think. So, yeah, conservation agriculture works, but it works in specific conditions or specific ways, and can be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Batt, I think you want to ask a question. If there is no further questions.
Dr. Batt.
Dr. Batt, you want to ask?
Yes, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much for a very extensive talk on this program. I was concerned about the latest methods of new technologies coming up for agriculture, and in particular, the nanofertilizers and the control of the seeds germination, and is coming up in a big way. How do you think this will improve the situation of food security and in the agriculture and the in the coming years?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Well, I have to admit that I'm not a specialist in nano fertilizers or in seed germination. It's not my specialty. But I read a lot about the nano technologies, and I think there is potential in nano approaches. But I'm not sure I can answer you about the fertilizers, nano fertilizers. But there is a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of research going on, and seed germination is very important. I have suffered from seed germination in the Badia, and Dr. Dweri knows. We plant seeds in the Badia, and then crust come on, and there is no germination at all. There are issues with seed germination that require lots of talk and research to resolve. But there are two important issues, but I really cannot judge on latest on these things.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
There further question? There is no further questions. I would like to come to the end of this very interesting webinar, and hope to see you again in our next activity. Thank you very much.
I also would like to thank everybody for very good audience. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, Dr. Theib. Hope to see you again. Assalamu alaikum.
Then Dr. Ajluni.
Hello, Dr. Adnan.
Hello, Oscar. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
But you look very young.
Well,
Professor Butt, how are you?
very fine, thank you. But Asghar is only 6 days younger than me.
No, not 6 days. No, not 6 days. 3 days.
How many? 3 days. Okay. Yes, great. 3 days only. But he is my younger brother.
I have known him for 60 years now.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very nice.
Always devilish.